Topic that we will discuss tonight will be Imam Mahdi in light of heavenly books in the Quran, in the Old Testament, in the New Testament. To give us this discussion, please help me with a loud salawat. Welcome to the podium, Mr. Danish Esteki.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Thanks for the introduction. Thanks for Mateen for that speech before. It's going to be kind of hard for me to follow after his very impassioned speech. The topic I have for you today is Imam Mahdi in the Quran and other texts, or in other heavenly books, as Mahdi put it. So the idea here, in general, naturally, we tend to want to consult the Quran on topics. When we want to know something, it makes sense we're going to go to the Quran as a primary source. And why is this? Well, Allah tells us in the Quran, He says, وَنَزَّلْنَا عَلَيْكَ الْكِتَابِ تِبْيَانًا لِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ. We have revealed to you the book as an explanation of all things. We also have Hadith Thaqalain, which is a well-known, I'm sure to all of us here, in which the Prophet said, I am leaving among you two weighty things, the book of Allah and my progeny, my Ahlul Bayt. So long as you uphold both of them, you will never be misled after me. Now again, a thing to keep in mind though in the Quran, it's many times not specific or immediately obvious to us when it's talking about something. So when we try to look for information about Imam Mahdi, we shouldn't expect to see something, saying on such and such a date, he will be born, and exact descriptors of him. We have to use our brains a little bit, and we have to use the words of our imams and other personalities in order to try and find out about him from the Quran. Now, I'd like to also talk a little bit about what is in common between the way the Quran talks about Imam Mahdi and the way that both the Old and the New Testament speak about the concept of a Messiah. So I'm going to start in Isaiah 11, a few excerpts from it. And it says, but with righteousness he will be judged, he will judge the needy. With justice he will give decisions for the poor of the earth. Righteousness will be his belt, and faithfulness the sash around his waist. This passage, the verse before it and the few after it, cite a couple other qualities, but I just wanted to focus on this one of righteousness. I'm not going to add too much comment for this right now. We're going to go to a few other verses and then go to a few verses of the Quran and kind of put it all together. So if we look in Psalms 37, we see that it says, a little while and the wicked will be no more, but the meek will inherit the land and enjoy peace and prosperity. And if again we also look at Matthew 5:5 as a verse that I think many of us have seen in various contexts. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Now, at first glance, the two on this slide and the selection on the previous slide may not be immediately obvious that they're related, or that they talk about, or that these two in particular talk about a Messiah. But if we look at two verses from the Quran, I think it becomes a little more clear, and we can also see some similarities. In Surah A'raf, verse 128, Allah says to us, إِنَّ الْأَرْضَ لِلَّهِ يُورِثُهَا مَن يَشَاءُ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ وَالْعَاقِبَةُ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. The earth belongs to God. He invests in inheritance to whomever He wills of His servants, and the end is best for the righteous. Now, the end is best for the righteous. Who are the righteous? I think intuitively we would think, well, the Imams, right? They are the best of us, the Imams and the Prophets. So it makes sense that this verse might be about them. And in fact, there are many hadiths that say that this ayah refers to the Imams and the Ahlul Bayt. For example, we have a hadith from Imam Baqir in which he says, we found the following written in the book of Ali. My family and I are those who have inherited the earth, and we are the pious ones. On that day he will take control of all the land. The on that day he will take control of all the land was a later part of the excerpt from the book of Ali, as Imam Baqir narrates to us. And he, in this case, refers to Imam Mahdi, and on that day refers to the day of his reappearance. So from this, we can come to the conclusion that the righteous in the verse from Surah A'raf refers to Imam Mahdi, that the righteous will have the good end. In the end, the righteous, Imam Mahdi and his followers, will inherit the earth. We have a second verse from, and this one's from Surah Qasas, in which we read, وَنُرِيدُ أَنَّهُنَّ عَلَى الَّذِينَ اسْتُضْعِفُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ وَنَجْعَلَهُمْ أَئِمَّةً وَنَجْعَلَهُمُ الْوَارِثِينَ. And we desire to bestow upon those who were deemed weak in the land, and to make them the imams or leaders, and to make them the heirs. Okay, so clearly it says imam, so we're talking about leaders and imams, but what does the weak mean? That doesn't seem like a descriptor to use about our imams. Well, in fact, in this case, the weak does not refer to being physically weak or being mentally weak or some weakness of character. It instead refers to having people oppose you or being oppressed in some manner, having your political power or other types of things taken away from you by virtue of being opposed by other people. And we have multiple hadiths that say this refers to the Ahlul Bayt. And if we think about it in this context, it makes sense that it would refer to the Ahlul Bayt. I mean, you can look at examples from Imam Ali, from when after the Prophet's passing, when they tried to force him to give his allegiance. You look at Imam Hussein in Karbala. If you look at, as Mateen said earlier, you look at the fact that Imam Hassan Asghari was in house arrest. So many of our imams were oppressed in one way or the other. And so this descriptor, the weak, makes sense in the context that I've just spoken about. Now, thinking back to the verses from the Old and New Testament I mentioned earlier, we had two verses which talked about the meek inheriting the earth, and we had a set of verses talking about the righteousness of their Messiah. Now we look at the two verses from the Quran that I just spoke of. We have the meek inheriting the earth, or the weak inheriting the earth, and the righteous inheriting the earth. So if we apply kind of the same viewpoint that the Quran takes to the verses from the Old and New Testament, it seems reasonable that the meek from the two verses earlier from the New and Old Testament could also refer to the Messiah. It also makes a little sense if you look at the verses surrounding them, especially in Isaiah. They refer, in all cases, they're referring to things that will happen in the future. All right, so we've talked some about circumstances leading up to the reappearance, or what some characteristics of Imam Mahdi are. But what happens when he reappears? What are the things that happen? So we start again in the Old Testament, and Isaiah tells us, "And the loftiness of man shall be bowed down, and the haughtiness of man shall be humbled, and the Lord alone shall be exalted on that day, and the idols shall completely pass away." Now looking at Revelation, we see, "Then the seventh angel blew his trumpet, and there were loud voices in heaven, saying, 'The kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever.'" Both of these verses clearly indicate that when, the idea of when the chosen one of the Messiah returns, there will be a period in which Judaism or Christianity prevails over the other religions. The idols shall be completely passed away. The kingdom of our Lord and his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. Now, if we look at what the Quran has to say about this, there's a very similar discussion in Surah Tawbah, verse 33. هو الذي أرسل رسوله بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله ولو كره المشركون. It is he who sent his messenger with guidance and the religion of truth, in order to make it prevail over all religions, even though the idolaters dislike it. So the second part of this makes sense. It clearly has a direct relation to the two verses I just mentioned from the Old and New Testament. But this doesn't really seem to mention Imam Mahdi. It mentions the Holy Prophet. So how do we relate this to Imam Mahdi? Well, the answer to that is, we talked about the religion of Islam dominating or prevailing over other religions. And clearly during the time of the Holy Prophet, this was not the case. Islam was not numerically, was not the majority in the world. If you looked around the world, not 90% of the people were not Muslims. So it seems logical then that the reappearance of Imam Mahdi is what is being referred to in this verse. And in fact, there are many hadiths, which I won't get into right now due to time, that mention that this is indeed referring to the reappearance of Imam Mahdi. Another interesting thing about this verse is that we can think of the reappearance of Imam Mahdi as the culmination of the Holy Prophet's mission. Again, returning back to the translation, it says, "It is he who sent his messenger with guidance in order to make it prevail over all religions." So it's saying that the reason why the Holy Prophet was sent to us was for this time when Imam Mahdi returns to us. I think that's really important to think about, that point is everything is Imam Mahdi's return, and just how important that should be to each and every one of us. One last thing I wanted to touch on before I close is how his reign actually will be, like what it will be like to experience that. In Isaiah, it says, "The wolf will live with the lamb, the leopard will lie down with the goat, the calf and the lion and the yearling together, and a little child will lead them." We have a hadith from Ibn Abbas which says there will be a harmony. So the sheep and wolf, the cow and the lion, and man and snake will live in peace. So much so that no mice will break into a food bin. And this will happen when the Qa'im rises. So we see here that the period of time after Imam Mahdi returns and he's established his governance will be a very peaceful time for us. So much so that the example is given where animals that were previously prey can sit next to their predator and feel no fear. So now moving on to conclude, I just wanted to kind of go over what we just talked about. We have that, there are obviously differences between Islam, Shia Islam, and Christian and Judaism, but there are a lot of common factors when we look at the idea of Imam Mahdi or the idea of a Messiah, Christian or Jewish Messiah. The idea of the righteous or the weak inheriting the earth, this period of the supremacy of the religion, and also this period being a time of peace. So inshallah, we of course always ask for Allah to speed his reappearance and the establishment of his government. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.